I'm joined now by Kamran Bokhari in Toronto. He's a Middle East and South Asia specialist from the University of Ottawa to talk more about all of this. Let's start with Moscow's announcement of the withdrawal of troops. How do you think this might affect the conflict and the peace talks? Putin saying he's created the conditions for the peace talks.
Well, I think that, he's probably right in some respects, because if you look at it, he has helped the Assad regime gain the upper hand in the war against the rebels. There's been, territory has shifted hands, and we do have negotiations. There is a ceasefire, which, fighting continues, but it's still being called a ceasefire. So I think that, there is an element of truth to what he's saying.
Talk to us about the difference in the air campaigns that Russia did and the U.S. Forces.
I mean, clearly the U.S. is targeting ISIS and the Nusra Front, whereas the U.S. can't be openly seen as helping out the Assad regime. In sharp contrast, the Russians have helped Assad's forces work closely with them to attack ISIS, Nusra, and the rebels as well. And in a way, Russia and the United States share the goal of not having Assad fall. The difference is the United States can't help Assad openly. So in a way, the Russians did something for the United States that Washington couldn't do itself.
The UN Special Envoy for Syria called the resumption of the talks a moment of truth, and that the only plan B is a return to war. What do you make of that assessment? And we know it's going to be difficult to come up with some kind of agreement. How do you see the path forward?
I think that the path forward is pretty much, there's going to be more war. The question is not if, but when. And I mean, that much we also see from the UN envoy, who's saying, if this doesn't succeed, and, his remarks don't repose a whole lot of confidence to anybody hearing them, that there will be fighting. If there is to be a peace, we're years away from it. If you're the Assad regime, why would you want to negotiate seriously if you've gained the upper hand in the battlefield? And if you're the rebels, why would you want to negotiate seriously when you've just lost territory and your position has been weakened?
And the main point all along, this tussle between the United States and Russia has been over the fate of Assad. And now you see a shift, not necessarily publicly by the U.S. How does that change the equation?
Well, Mike, I don't think that there was a tussle per se. Yes, there is competition between the United States and Russia. Keep in mind that what Russia really wants is not in Syria; it's in Ukraine, and Syria is used as a leverage in those negotiations, give and take bargaining with the United States. As far as Syria is concerned, neither the United States wants Assad to fall and ISIS to benefit, and the Russians don't want to see Assad fall either. The only difference is the Russians could come directly to the aid of Damascus, whereas the United States could not. And in some ways, Russia helped the United States out. The question is, what is Russia getting in return? And again, not in Syria, but in its near abroad.
Let's talk a little bit more about this ceasefire, because I remember us talking about it before it went into place, and then even after, you were not convinced that it would work very well. There has been a reduction in violence from this partial ceasefire. Surprised at that, and how does that affect the talks?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, the thing is that it's still very fragile. I mean, we're not a whole lot of, the truce has been in place for, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks. I'm forgetting the actual date. But the question is, there's a long road ahead. And everybody who's engaged in the efforts to get the peace talks moving is not really optimistic that that will happen. So where do we go from here? Does everybody go home? No, they go back to, fighting each other. I mean, this is a window of opportunity, but at the end of the day, the truth, I mean, even the truce, if you look at it, everybody's accusing the other side of violations. The only thing that we're not seeing is that the formal declaration that there is no more truce anymore. So I think there is an understanding. We'll keep fighting, but we'll still call it a truce.
And Cameron, one final question before you go. We've talked a lot about Turkey involved in all of this, bordering Syria. What about the attack this weekend in Ankara?
I mean, clearly, it demonstrates that there's a lot of work that the Turks have to do to be able to play an effective role in Syria. I mean, they have to watch, look over their shoulder and see if they're, getting heavily involved in Syria, are they going to be attacked from their rear? Because the first thing that they have to deal with are the Syrian Kurds, even if before they go into ISIS land or they go and back rebels in some significant way against the Assad regime. So once you do that, you have to watch out, okay, so you're going after the PYD and the YPG in Syria. What happens to the PKK that you're already fighting domestically? So I think that there's going to be repercussions on the domestic front, and that's not the only group that's going to be attacking the Turks. ISIS has demonstrated attacks as well, so we're probably going to be seeing, attacks of both types moving forward.